Welcome. My name is Quill Robinson, and I serve as a senior advisor with ConservAmerica. ConservAmerica is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to the development and advancement of sound environmental and conservation policy. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Senator Tom Tillis. Senator Tillis was elected to represent North Carolina and the U.S. Senate in 2014, and he is now a member of the Senate Finance Committee, Veteran Affairs Committee, Banking House and Urban Affairs Committee, and Judiciary Committee. He is also a member of the Roosevelt Conservation Caucus. So, Senator, thank you so much for being part of that important caucus. So welcome. And just to start, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the importance of conservation leadership and why you, as a Republican, are a leader on environmental and conservation issues.
Well, it's unfortunate that over time it's become so politically charged. I think, as somebody who spends the majority of my time when I'm not in DC in nature, it always makes me chuckle when I think that there are people that cast Republicans as somehow not wanting clean air, not wanting abundant species going through our natural areas. I think it's all a matter of not the what, but the how. And I believe that RAWA is a good example of how we may be able to get people together on just common sense policies that will actually do good to conserve species of concern.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. And RAWA has been a priority for ConservAmerica for a number of years now. It has been bouncing around in Congress for around 8 years. Obviously, it's a bipartisan priority. It's something that a lot of different groups support. Could you just tell us a little bit about RAWA, the bill itself, what it would do, and why it is so important?
Yeah, what we're really trying to do at the end of the day, I think we all agree if we want to have the most positive impact, we should really be modernizing and reforming the Endangered Species Act. So to a certain extent, RAWA is sort of I don't want to call it a Band-Aid, but in many respects, it is somewhat of a Band-Aid for what could be dealt with, I think, with a broader treatment for the Endangered Species Act. So what we're really talking about doing here is spending money to prevent a species from being listed. I believe that the appropriate term would be a species of greatest conservation need, I believe. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is getting ahead of the curve so that the monies can be freed up that will otherwise be required to be compliant with the Endangered Species Act after a species is listed. So it's just getting involved earlier in the cycle. The one example I try to use is a species of woodpecker that we have in North Carolina. I always joke that Marines are really not afraid of many things, but they're very, very afraid of a woodpecker that happens to have gotten to a point where it was listed and then dramatically limiting what troop movement and exercises down in and around Camp Lejeune. So that's just one example. Now we're spending tens of millions, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in remediation that if we'd just been forward looking and invested the money up front, we could have avoided, which is a dangerous situation for a species, but also a very expensive, costly, and time-consuming process once a species is listed. So the whole idea is just trying to get up. It's the ounce of prevention, and right now we have pounds of cure going in after a species is listed as endangered.
Certainly, that's really what comes to mind for me is the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and this is certainly the case when it comes to RAWA. Senator, the other thing that really stands out to me about this bill is the very wide coalition of groups that are supporting it and have consistently supported it. Could you talk a little bit about that coalition of groups that you have met with and worked with on RAWA?
Yeah, I think it's critically important. I point out, to my friends on the left, I point out so many groups that they would normally identify with. To my friends on the right, I would point out another group of people that they would generally identify with. And I'm thinking beyond organized groups. I'm thinking about go talk to your agriculture commissioners. This is probably one of the more important. Let's talk to the people on the ground who understand the value of doing the work to reestablish habitat, to work towards healthier populations, to avoid listing. agriculture community alone should be all over this bill, and in most cases they are. That's why we have to communicate it differently. Quite honestly, anytime you come up, because of the work we have to do and some of the challenges with the Endangered Species Act, you have conservatives just like kind of skeptical about this being something that they can support. And you have to go back to these groups, conservation groups, business groups, agriculture advocates. It has probably one of the most diverse populations of support that you're going to see. What we have here, the real challenge, what it comes down to, Quillen, it comes down to pay for funding. I think among conservatives now, when you tell them the substance of the bill, they like it. Now we've got to come up with a pay for the estimated $1.4 billion a year that's going to be necessary. But I think that is a fraction of the cost that we're going to avoid once we get this bill in place.
That's right, Senator. And so could you tell us a little bit more about what it's going to take to get this bill across the finish line this Congress? Obviously, there's, as you mentioned, there is wide support. There are a lot of folks who are invested in getting this done. But from your perspective, what do you need to get it across the finishing line?
Oh, we've got to work with the House, and I want to thank Chair Westerman. I think he's done a good job. We've got to clear some of the hurdles on the House side and come up with a pay for. That's what we use to offset the cost of a bill. Come up with a consensus pay for. I think generally speaking, the text of the bill is sound. There have been some who have suggested a raw light or something that nips around the edges of what we're trying to accomplish. I think most of that is motivated more by trying to figure out how to pay for it than it is by having any concerns with the underlying bill. So it's a very difficult time now with our debt reaching the $34 trillion mark. I think it is important, but I also think that we have to look at the cost avoidance. The challenge here is it may, and we may have to get more creative in terms of the pay for. We need to go look at the stakeholders who will benefit from this bill and try to figure out if we can't find a consensus pay for, maybe we need to be a little bit more creative moving forward. That to me is the stumbling block. And I think that Chair Westerman's done a good job, but we've got to work with the House to try and figure out that source. It's the only impediment. But as you've said, it's been around for several years. I'm the latest standard bearer following Senator Blunt on the Republican side, but I want to lean into it and crack the nut.
Well, we certainly appreciate your leadership on this bill, sir, and Mr. Westerman's as well. Senator, I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk a bit about clean energy. You've been a real champion of clean energy, and of course, North Carolina is a crucial state in this conversation. Over the last couple of years, we've seen billions and billions of dollars invested, both from the public and private sectors, into clean energy. And we are also seeing this conversation about supply chains and how we can build more clean energy at home really develop. Just last week, the Biden administration announced a new round of tariffs on certain strategic industries that come from China. So I'm curious, given your business background, what do you think needs to happen to help us continue to build out our clean energy here at home without increasingly becoming reliant on strategic adversaries like China?
I think we have to be smart about it, smart about the transition. That's why I'm really concerned with the way that we went about. Last week, I spoke at the Bipartisan Policy Center, and we touched on this subject. And I feel like we need to be more patient with respect to transition. If you take a look at the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a lot of people that are happy about the policies in there related to this subject, but they should also know, because it was passed purely on partisan grounds, some of the good policy in the Inflation Reduction Act may be at risk of repeal depending upon the political outcomes for the next cycle. So why don't we sit down and come up with something that's smart, that is sustainable? There are clearly examples in the Inflation Reduction Act where I think they're more aspirational than grounded in science and good business decision making. We need an all of the above strategy that gets us to a fully renewable portfolio at some point of time, or green alternatives. But the biggest impediment to that are it's the all electric now, and the drill baby drill crowd need to really kind of resolve their differences and come to the middle and recognize that at the end of the day, we need a good, sound, comprehensive strategy. We're not quite ready to make the transition as quickly as people would like to, but we need to make it. And then I'll go back to North Carolina. I think one of the reasons why North Carolina is one of those success stories is that I was part of averting a disaster back in 2007 when North Carolina was going to be the first state in the Southeast to pass a renewable portfolio standard. The problem was they originally proposed twice what we ultimately negotiated down to. If it had been at 25%, which was the original text of a bill that I decided to see if I could get Democrats to agree to do something bipartisan, I think North Carolina would have been a failure today. We wouldn't be pointing to it as a great example of policy working. We'd be pointing to it as legislators got aspirational and went too far. I think the same thing has to be true in Washington around these other issues. So why have we dismissed natural gas as a key part of the transition? Well, because we found out there was a lot of it. Even after we passed the renewable portfolio standard in North Carolina, all the environmentalists were cool with natural gas until we found out that we had an abundant supply. Now they're not cool with it because it gets away from what they want to do. The bottom line is there is a place for it. And if you have reasonable-minded people, of course you want to diminish that over time. But if you have reasonable-minded people get into the room, you won't have these every 4-year scares of Inflation Reduction Act. Yay, we're moving forward. And now next year, woo, we may be taking a step back. Let's get out of that policy. Let's be fact-based. Let's not be aspirational. And if we are, then the nation can actually benefit from sound policies that North Carolina implemented nearly 17 years ago.
Sure thing. And I think that's why pragmatic leadership and Republican leadership from members like yourself who are pragmatists, who understand the importance of developing clean energy at an appropriate pace are so important. My final question for you here, Senator, is what are you looking at? Of course, there is a potential change in the administration coming up in the next year, and in Congress as well. What are some of your policy priorities to continue to advance the expansion of clean energy in that appropriate, measured way that you're describing? What are some of the things that you're looking at to make sure that that happens?
Well, I think a part of what we need from the industry is, and for advocates, is to take a look at, I've said this to groups a couple of times over the last month, you need to go through the Inflation Reduction Act and kind of do a stop, start, continue. With respect to the energy policies. Obviously, IRA went beyond that, but within the energy lanes, what should we preserve because it's working, the numbers work, it makes sense? What is aspirational? Maybe we need to rethink timelines or provide more flexibility. We need to go through that, because if we don't, and we run the table, and frankly, in full disclosure, I hope we do, and have Republican control of Congress and the White House, we could throw some babies out with the bathwater. Not everything in the Inflation Reduction Act was bad. A lot of things were bad, but not everything. And in the energy space, it was just a matter of doing the extra work that's required to get bipartisan support. So now, communicating what does work, what's not aspirational, and a willingness to kind of compromise on bridging the gap would be time well spent for people who would not like to see an outright repeal. Because it's going to be politically very difficult next year to be, as a Republican, to be opposed to repealing any aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act. I get that. I've probably got staff that wished I wasn't saying what I'm saying right now. But the point is, there are some that should be repealed, even in the energy space. Others just need to be modified and made more viable in the long term.
Absolutely, completely understand that, Senator. As you stated, things like carbon capture and nuclear energy, and there's a lot of technologies that are in there that have historic Republican support, and I think we need a nuanced approach to this. Well, Senator, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. And on behalf of Conserve America, I would like to thank you for your leadership on conservative conservation. So thank you again for your time, sir.
Thank you.